Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of the Pryce Podcast, The Culture Clash. Now, today, we got something big for you guys. It is crime and law enforcement. What does it mean by soft on crime ideology in cities and institutions? What are the impacts on public safety, deterrence, justice, and social order? We'll be going through all that right here, right now. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Culture Clash.
All right. Like I said before, tonight we are going to be confronting one of the most consequential battles of the future of our nation. And I mean the future of our nation. Sorry. The ideological transformation of American crime and law enforcement, from the streets of our cities to the offices of progressive prosecutors, legislators, and cultural institutions. Now, we will examine the historical foundations of American justice and policing and their transformation. The ideological shifts that reframed law enforcement from the protection of the innocent, the residents of evil, and the preservation of ordered liberty to a vehicle for social engineering, racial grievance, and the erosion of deterrence, and the profound tensions this creates with public safety, equal justice under law, victim rights, community trust, and the moral fabric of a free citizen. Bro, come on. We are back. Sorry about that. But like I was saying before, only with history, empirical data, ethical analysis, and a clear-eyed assessment of long-term implications for the United States in 2026 and beyond. Now, let's begin with the historical trajectory. For much of America's history, criminal justice rested on a Judeo-Christian foundation and classical principles of natural law. The purpose of government as the founders, all right. The purpose of government, as the founders understood, included the protection of life, liberty, and property. Now, if we go to New York, we kind of see anywho. I'm not gonna go on a tangent here. Anywho, policing evolved from colonial night watches and constables into professional forces charged with maintaining order, investigating crime, and bringing offenders before impartial courts. The rule of law demanded equal application, due process, proportionate punishments, and the presumption of innocence. Yet, it never denied the reality of human evil or the necessity of force to restrain it. Deterrence, incapitation, retribution, and rehabilitation stood as complementary aims. High clearance rates, swift justice, and cultural norms that stigmatize criminality helped produce the long crime decline of the late 20th century, culminating in history law violence crime rates by the early 2010s. The pivotal turning point arrived with the rise of progressive criminology and critical theories. In the late 20th century and early 21st century, drawing from Marxist, postmodern, and identity-based frameworks, these ideologies recast crime not primarily as individual moral failure, but as a product of oppression, poverty, racism, and unequal power. The root causes narrative displaced personal agency. By the 2010s, and especially after 2014 and 2020, concepts such as mass incarceration, defund the police, abolish prisons, cashless bail, and restorative justice gained institutional traction. Progressive prosecutors in major cities adopted policies of non-prosecution for entire categories of offenses, reduced charging, in opposition to cash bail, framed as equality, framed as equity and decarceration. The 2020 riots following George Floyd's death accelerated culture capture. Police were publicly demonized, recruitment collapsed, and cities diverted funds from law enforcement towards social programs. What began as efforts to address genuine disparities evolved into a de facto ideology prioritizing group outcomes, narrative over evidence, and the presumption that law enforcement itself constitutes a primary threat. Now, the cultural and institutional capture accelerated. Media, academia, activist organizations, and certain corporate and foundation founders amplified the narrative that American policing is systematically racist and that traditional enforcement perpetuates injustice. Terms such as over policing, criminalization of poverty, and expansive definitions of racial profiling, which I'm not gonna lie, is valid. Okay. It reshaped training, policy, and public discourse. Dissenting officers, prosecutors, or citizens who insisted on biological and behavioral realities, crime concentration, family structure correlations, or the necessity of proactive policing were frequently labeled bigoted or reactionary and faced professional or suicidal sanctions. Clearance rates Clearance rates for homicide and other violent crimes declined in many jurisdictions as trust eroded and resources were redirected. Now we turn to the empirical realities that ground this debate. But before we do, a word from our sponsor. Introducing Pryce Shorts, the sharpest insights and most engaging moments from the Pryce Podcast and Boy Basic, now in the palm of your hand. Thought provoking commentary, even in a fatherless era. Faithful fatherhood conforms us to Jesus and builds his kingdom across generations. Practical advice for the individual, all in seconds. Pryce Shorts, your daily dose of premium content from Pryce Media Group LLC. Subscribe now and never miss the best bites. Peace. Go to Pryce Shorts, YouTube, Rumble. Yeah, it's really just say YouTube and Rumble. And go to TikTok, the real Jonathan Pryce. Anywho, we turn to the empirical realities that grounded this debate. The years 2020 and 2020 through 2022 witnessed one of the sharpest spikes in homicides and violent crime in modern American history. FBI data and major city reporting documented double-digit percentage increases in murder in numerous urban centers, with Black Americans, particularly young men, disproportionately victimized. Retail theft, carjackings, and open air disorder surged in cities that adopted the most aggressive soft on crime policies. By 2024-2025, a partial reversal occurred. Murders fell nearly 20% in the first 10 months of 2025 compared with the same period in 2024, according to the analysis of major jurisdiction. Yet, This improvement followed policy course corrections in several cities, increased proactive enforcement, and the natural regression after extreme disorder. Cultural residual, critical residual problems remain. Officer assaults reached a 10-year high in 2025, with a rate of 13.8 assaults per 100 officers. Police staffing in large departments remains substantially below 2019 levels in many cities. Shortages measured in the hundreds or thousands in places such as New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. I'm pretty sure you guys can guess why. Now, sorry. Now, that's a lot. Clearance rates. While improved in some departments, such as Baltimore, still lag historical norms nationally. Mental health cities or mental health cries, fentanyl driven overdoses, and repeat offending by individuals released under lenient pre-trial policies continue to burden communities. These outcomes coincide with the expansion of the ideological content in criminal justice. Reports document the influence of progressive prosecutors who declined to charge entire offensive categories, the effects of bail reform that returned high defendants to the streets pending trial, and a cultural demoralization of police following sustained public hostility. Victim surveys and business flights from high incentives, recalls of persecutors, from high crime commercial corridors underscore the human and economic cost. Now, parental and citizen pushback has grown, producing ballot incentives, recalls of prosecutors, state level prevention of local soft on crime ordinances, and executive actions restoring federal support for law and order priorities. Hey man, what's up? Well, thanks for coming by. Anyway, this brings us to the fundamental clash. Crime and law enforcement are not merely technical public safety functions, they are expressions of society's moral order and its commitment to protect the weak from the predatory. Bedtime stories. I mean, sure. It's a story that's got to be told, so it's still going to be told. Now, traditional approaches prioritize objective truth about human nature, the equal dignity of every victim, righteous investigation, swift and certain consequences, and the cultural transmission of self control and respect for law. Cheers, bro. What laws are you quoting? Not quoting any laws, just going over the data, basically. There's historical trajectories, empirical data, all of that. Yes, traditional approaches prioritize objective truth about human nature, the equal dignity of every victim, righteous investigation, swift and certain consequences, and the cultural transmission of self-control and respect for law. Woke and progressive frameworks often frame the justice system, police, and traditional norms of order as inherently oppressive, however they want to say it, centering racial identity, historical grievance, and the decarceration, I would say, of offenders as primary goods. Proponents argue this fosters equity, reduces harm, and addresses root causes. Critics contend It undermines deterrence, abandons victims, especially in minority communities that suffer the highest victimization rates, distorts statistical realities of crime patterns, erodes social trust, and substitutes ideological narrative for evidence-based policing, continuing to continuing to preventable death, disorder, and cultural fragmentation. Now, the philosophical and ethical dimensions run very deep, very, 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 very deep. Government exists. Good night, brother. The government exists in significant measure to bear the sword against evil and to secure the conditions of human flourishing. Romans 13. Parents, churches, and communities share responsibility for forming character that resists criminal temptation. The state must not abdicate its duty to restrain those who will not be restrained by conscience. Prioritizing evidence based strategies, hotspots policing, focused deterrence, swift prosecution of violence and reports and repeat offenders, and support for intact families reflects moral dignity to the next generation and to the most vulnerable. Now, when institutions impose contested ideologies that treat enforcement itself as suspect or that prioritize the comfort of offenders over the safety of law abiding citizens, profound questions of justice, authority, and the common good arise. Nuances demand careful consideration, addressing genuine historical injustices, reforming excessive sentences for non-violent offenses, while where appropriate, improving police training and accountability and expanding opportunity are valuable and consistent with American ideals. Mental health diversion and re-entry programs can serve legitimate ends when they do not compromise public safety. Yet, data and lived experience suggest that rapid ideological integration, defunding, non-persecution, cashless bail without risk assessment, and the cultural stigmatization of police often correlates with elevated victimization, lowered clearance rates, officer attrition, and resistance to empirical realities concerning crime concentration, offender patterns, and the protective value of law and order. Broader patterns reveal that cities reversing course have begun to recover safely, while those clinging to the most extreme progressive models continue to pay a steep human price. Now, the cultural messaging has profoundly shaped perception. Concern about soft on crime policies are often moralized as racism, authoritism, or fear mongering, while the body count itself, disproportionately borne by the poor and Black Americans, is minimized or attributed solely to systemic forces behind individual agency. Institutional incentives, including activist influence in prosecutor elections, foundation funding, and media framing. Sorry, I'm going all over the place. Need some water. Water. Very good for everybody. Institutional incentives, including activist influence in prosecutor elections, foundation funding, and media framing, frequently overshadow core outcomes of reduced violence and restored order. Broader implications extend to every domain. In public safety, diverted focus and demoralized forces leave communities exposed. Culturally, the narrative that law is oppression risks producing generations less attached to shared rules and more inclined to grievance or sorry, predation. Economic and socially, disorder drives businesses, families, and capital from cities, depending, deepening inequity. Politically, it fuels citizen revolts, recalls, and policy shifts toward restoration. The partial crime declines of 2024 and 2025 and the 2025-2026 reassertion of enforcement dem- priorities demonstrate that course correction is possible when political will and cultural clarity return. Now, looking forward to 2026, a word from our sponsor. Sorry. Introducing Pryce Shorts, the sharpest insights and most engaging. Take a moment to join the Pryce Media community on Discord. This is your space for deeper biblical discussion, cultural discernment, and authentic faith filled conversations with like minded believers. Connect with fellow listeners, engage with the episodes, and grow together in truth. Join now at prycemedia.shop/Discord. Let's continue the conversation. Now, looking forward in 2026 and the coming decade, pathways must prioritize national interests, victim welfare, and the common good. Restore focus on core functions, proactive and constitutional policing, high clearance rates, swift and certain prosecution of violence and repeat offenders, and honest risk assessment in pretrial release. Uphold equal justice under law rather than equity of outcomes that excuses predation. Eliminate ideological mandates that treat policing as inherently suspect in favor of evidence based strategies and biological and behavioral truth. Reform prosecutor offenses, offices, and police training to emphasize public safety and moral clarity over activism. Support policies that strengthen families, churches, and mediating institutions that form character. Invest in the men and women who wear the badge, ensuring adequate staffing, equipment, and cultural respect. Cultural renewal requires recommitting to justice as the restraint of evil and the protection of the innocent over social engineering and the re romanticization of disorder. The crime and law enforcement debates test a society's commitment to truth, prudence, and the protection of the vulnerable. It forces confrontation while with whether ideological conformity or clear-eyed realism better secures ordered liberty. History and evidence reveal the necessity of preserving institutions dedicated to justice, deterrence, and cultural continuity, not transformation through the soft bigotry of low expectations or the abandonment of the sword. Ethics and statements require balancing compassion for offenders capable of reform with unflinching realism about those who prey upon others, and the unwavering preference for the safety of the innocent. This is the culture clash. It concerns not merely arrest statistics or clearance rates, but the kind of people and nation we will form. One grounded in moral order, personal responsibility, and the equal protection of every life, no matter the race. Or history will be of one fragmented by grievance, relativism, and the triumph of the predatory over the peaceful. History will judge how we responded. The path forward demands intellectual honesty, moral clarity, policy courage, and the renewed fidelity to justice's highest purposes. Sorry, oh my gosh. Thank you for engaging with this deep examination. Share this episode if it challenged you or clarified your thinking. Subscribe if you are new, like the video. Support independent discourse that refuses to evade difficult realities. Until next time, may we pursue truth with both conviction and clarity. Keep seeking the kingdom first. God bless. This has been the Pryce Podcast. Peace.
Hands up, speakers blast. The culture clash.